First, I'd like to start off with Clemente Jaquez. Clemente is a first-generation professional and architect in his family. Visiting the construction sites with his father in Mexico, Clemente was greatly influenced by architecture early in his career. He clearly saw the idea of the master architect as the orchestrator of the built environment. In 2019, Clemente and his business partner established Modus Architecture. The firm has embraced a straightforward mission, designed for people and work with purpose. Clemente is a fervent advocate for all things AIA Dallas and currently serves on the board of directors for the ADEX Architecture Foundation with a focus on scholarships and education advancement. Clemente's vocation, besides an avid community designer, is to educate his two young boys and a three-month baby girl to be design thinkers and embrace the challenges and opportunities of life. So Clemente, on behalf of our chapter, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Next up, I'd like to introduce John Shiver. John comes to us today. John is actually one of our Camp Pro mentors. He's in our Camp Professional Mentorship Program here at UTA AIAS. And as a matter of fact, he's my professional mentor. So I thought it'd be great to invite John to join in on the conversation. John has 29 years experience specializing in planning, design, and construction of educational facilities. As an education practice and thought leader, he supports clients and project teams as a facilitator in the planning and development of architectural design solutions that respond to clients' needs. He has spent his career aligning architectural solutions to support each client's learning model to enhance the learner experience. John has owned his own firm, Shiver Associates Architects, specializing in planning, design, construction of educational facilities for 20 years and maintained a small office with a staff of 6 to 10 architects. In his role, he had the opportunity to direct all efforts related to business operations, marketing, client development, planning, design, and construction. Currently, John is a principal and the North Texas market leader for Stantec's office located in Plano. Stantec is the #1 top 100 architecture engineering firm in 2020, as ranked by Building Design and Construction. Founded in 1954, the Stantec community unites more than 22,000 employees and 350 offices on 6 continents. John enjoys speaking and presenting at professional organizations, or to professional organizations, on research and best practices related to planning and design of learning environments, as well as mentoring and coaching staff across disciplines. So, John, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Isaiah.
And last but not least, we have Professor David Messersmith. And for those who don't know, Professor Messersmith is the instructor for the professional practice course that is taught in the graduate curriculum. So for those of you in the audience who haven't had a chance to take his course yet, don't worry, it's really a great time, and it does open your eyes to a lot of the topics that we're going to talk about today. So I thought he would be a great contributor to tonight's conversation. David Messersmith, FAIA, relocated to Dallas in 2004 after more than 25 years as an owner and principal of MWM Architects, with offices in Lubbock and Midland, Texas. The firm was founded by his father, Bob Messersmith, AIA, Jeff Whitaker, AIA, and himself, and has been in continuous operation since 1977. Following his relocation to Dallas, he was an associate vice president in the office of HLM Design, vice president at Reese Architects Incorporated, and senior project manager at Jacobs, formerly Carter and Burgess. Currently, he's an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at Arlington School of Architecture, where he coordinates the professional practice courses at the master's level in architecture and at the bachelor's level in interior design. Throughout his career, David has been elected to leadership positions in the American Institute of Architects. He has led the Texas Society of Architects as president in 1994 and served on the National AIA Board of Directors from 1997 to 2000. In 1999, as AIA director from Texas, he carried the successful nomination of Ricardo Legarreta for the AIA Gold Medal. That same year, he was elevated to fellowship in the AIA for outstanding contributions to the profession. In 2015, he was appointed to the jury of the College of Fellows, the deliberative body that reviews and selects architects nationwide to be elevated to fellowship in the AIA. David's perspective of the architecture profession is shaped by 35 years of practice in small and large firms, and enriched by his leadership in the AIA at the local, state, and national levels. So last but not least, thank you, Professor Messersmith, for joining us this evening. Well, with introductions now out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into some of these questions. So the first question I have today is, how did you arrive at firm ownership leadership for the first time? And Clemente, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so my path has been, I believe, maybe similar, but also unique in some ways. I started at a large firm, actually RTKO, back in 2008. I got the privilege to go through the first recession in 2008, learned a lot through that, and saw the firm being able to mold and evolve to the needs of the market. So we went international, did a lot of work, and came back to the US to focus on that. Soon after I did a few years at RTKL, which was an amazing experience, decided to actually start with a group of people, another small firm, which is called Hayfer Wysocki, now Hayfer Welker. And I was a group of about 3 to 4 people that initially started that firm here in Dallas. And now that firm has grown to over 30 people, expanding multiple markets, and on its path to become a major national brand. Very excited for them. I think about 3 or 4 years into that, I asked myself that question is, where do I want to be in the next 5, 10 years? You know, my path was very apparent in that structure, to become the design director, to become actually one of the youngest partners at that firm. And I think do fairly well for myself. No complaints for sure. And I think this question of idealism came into mind. You know, what life as a designer, as a lifestyle do I want for myself? And this notion and this desire to have ownership over a firm, over the path and the vision of that firm, was quite honestly very enticing. So in 2019, just 2 years ago, we started Modus Architecture. And we had really no leads, no clients, rarely even had computers on 0% interest cards, and just started working and doing what we loved. And so here we are, just I feel like just like yesterday.
Great, thanks, Clemente. And I'm glad we were able to get you on board for today's conversation, because I know we have several students in the audience here today who are either about to graduate or nearing that horizon. And although many may not jump right into starting their own practice, I think a lot of us do have that ambition somewhere down our timeline. So I think you're going to provide a great perspective for those students who are interested in that, especially because you're so still relatively early on in your practice. So I think that'll be great.
Yes,
Professor Messersmith, you mind going next?
I'm happy to. I noted that your question asked about firm ownership and leadership, and that's so often a question that I get in my classes. We want to know more about owning our own firms or starting our own firms someday. So let me answer it in a general way, but I'll also tell you the specifics of my situation. There are any number of ways to advance to ownership and leadership. You can advance within an established firm. You can get your professional credentials started and then start your own firm, much like Clemente did. You can do like I did and have a father who's an architect and go into business, and that's a pretty smooth path, I have to admit. But the way to achieve that, I think, is to constantly be motivated to be your own boss and to do the things that position you to either advance within an established firm like RTKL or to start your own firm like Clemente, or to even then migrate to a mega firm the way Mr. Shiver has done. So there are any number of paths. The the challenge is to choose the path and pursue it until you achieve whatever it is you're after, ownership or partnership or being a shareholder, that kind of thing. So there's no set procedure for advancing to firm leadership.
Right, right, absolutely. And I would say equally the compliments I was giving Clemente or the benefits of having you on the panel, I'd say on the opposite end of the spectrum for you, Professor Messersmith, you've seen so many aspects of the professional side of practice, whether it's been in firm ownership yourself, but also your involvement with national organizations like the AIA or state level organizations like Texas Society of Architects. So I'm excited to hear more about that during the conversation. Next up, John, can we hear from you? And just a quick side note, don't mean to put John on blast. John's a very busy guy, so I'm glad he's able to join us. He actually got out of a client meeting not too long ago, so he made some time. He's out on the side of the road at the moment calling in. So John, appreciate you calling in and going that extra mile for me. I definitely owe you one. So what about you, John?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share. You know, I took a twisted path, and I kind of want to touch on leadership and ownership because they can be one and the same, and they can be two different things as well. I always wanted to be an architect. I just innately, knew that going through high school to drafting, and I was passionate about it. I knew a few architects, back home, but I got talked out of it when I went to school, and so I ended up going into the business school and transferred back into architecture as a junior at A&M. And for me, it was kind of interesting because I was invigorated again by what I was really passionate about. But along that path, I gained a lot of business experience. When I graduated with my master's at A&M, I ended up going to work for a guy because there was very little work at the time. And he did, he did something that really wasn't a project profile that I was interested in. It was big box retail. But he was one of the smartest businessmen that I ever worked with. And he shared the business side with me. And I'm truly indebted to this day to Raymond for that, because it gave me the education that I didn't get, in undergraduate and graduate school. And so I worked for him for a couple of years, and then I went to work for a firm that was a school design firm over in Irving. And at 32, I became a partner of that firm with two other partners. I was 32, the next partner was 42, and the guy that started the firm was 52. And like Professor Messersmith said, it was easy, moving into a firm, in a leadership and ownership position of a firm that had been established for 20 years. But after about 4 or 5 years, I realized, I really didn't have the right partners. I was carrying, probably 80% of the billings of the firm. I had 15, 16 people in my studio. I was doing the marketing, the business development, and the accounting, and just decided enough. I'm ready to just do this on my own. Retires. Or project responsibilities anymore. So I learned about school design there, and I really felt like I had the tool set at 34 to open my own practice, so I did. And it was probably one of the best decisions that I ever made. I love being a sole practitioner. I love the accountability every day of waking up and knowing that I was unemployed. It was up to me and me solely to go find work, develop, cultivate relationships with clients, to capture projects, to plan them, design them, and see them all the way through construction. And I generally had 6 to 10 people over those 20 years that were, working for me, and it was, just a really rich experience. And I encourage it for everyone to if you have an inkling that that's what you want to do, then go do it. But after 20 years, I was looking for younger leadership in the office that really didn't want that, and there were a couple of folks that I had kind of trained and cultivated as future leaders, and ultimately they left. And I wanted to grow the firm, and back in 2009 the market was down, especially in education. So I started thinking, man, what's next? And I had a couple of friends, at a mega firm, and they said, why don't you think about expanding your practice with us and have a bigger impact in education? And so I thought about it and said, well, the risk of failure is zero. I can always go back to working for myself. So I did it. And, it's been a great experience. Again, it's a very different experience than what I had as a sole practitioner. There's a lot of corporate, things that you have to deal with, that you have to deal with. And, that just kind of comes as part of it. Stantec is a publicly traded firm. So, anybody on this call can own us, quite honestly. So we don't have partners. We're publicly traded on Wall Street. I am an owner. I own stock in the company, and would encourage everyone in a leadership position in an organization to own stock in the company. But that's where the difference is in a firm our size. We have, very senior leadership that, have no vested interest as a partner or ownership interest in our firm. And then there's others like myself and others that have been there quite some time, that do have a stock position in the firm, and, have kind of skin in the game as I did when I had my own firm as a sole proprietor. But it's just kind of a different animal. So, in my smaller firm, I was both a leader and owner, and there were other leaders in that firm. In a firm like Stantec, we've got leaders that are not owners, and we have owners that are junior leadership, and that's just kind of the beauty of that organization and how I got there.
Great, thanks for sharing, John. And you actually touched on part of this next question, so maybe I'll turn right back to you so you can elaborate a bit more. This next question is, how different are the roles of a firm owner / leader and that of a designer or a project architect? So our more senior staff and perhaps junior or mid-tier staff. And John, you had spoken a little bit about the things that you had going on. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, that's a trick question though, Isaiah. So I think it really varies between firms. So, when I had my own firm, I didn't view myself as really any different than anyone else. I mean, my leadership and management style was, to elevate people to their highest potential. And, I would do things right there with them, and help lead and motivate, to go from point A to point B. But I was always in the trenches, and it's the same way in our firm now. Even though we're this huge kind of thing, it doesn't really feel like that. It kind of feels like I have my old office within an office, because we have studios and teams. And so, our office is really, Texas, because we have 4 offices in it that reports to the corporate structure. But within, each of these offices, I lead a team as a principal because I have client responsibilities. And so it's kind of a studio within our Texas office, if that makes sense. And so we're very flat. There's not a lot of hierarchy. We don't have, offices and things like that. We're all open, kind of concept. I sit in the middle of, a neighborhood. And part of that's by design, in that, younger staff can overhear conversations that I have with contractors. They can overhear conversations that I have with clients, and they can overhear conversations that I have in my business development role and learn from that. But it also kind of positions me to be accessible to everyone at any time. Now, all of that was pre-COVID, right? We have this thing now that we're working through. We've re-entered our office after the first of the year. So we're getting, we're starting to move back to where we were, but it's not going to be the same, and it'll be different. But, the idea pre-COVID was that everyone's accessible, and we have principals spread out throughout our office and neighborhoods, and they're really leading teams. And so really I engage with, because we have kind of three silos. There's a design silo, there's a project management silo, and then there's the project architect staff. And you can have somebody that's got 3 years experience in any one of those columns working on their project, or somebody that has 30 years experience, working on your project. So I engage with our designers, our project managers, our project architects every day. And through technology and things like Teams, I think we've increased our collaboration. And so, on a daily basis, I may, talk to the project architect group on our project at least once a day, just to kind of check in and see where they were or where they are on a project, what, kinds of things architecturally, they're resolving, as well as the project managers and kind of the processes and coordination pieces of it. And I think we've been able to leverage technology because we had 22,000 people go remotely. Everyone in our office is on a laptop, so that was really no big deal for us. And so we've been able to leverage, that kind of platform to kind of touch in more and increase the level of communication across our staff, whether that's junior staff or senior staff working on a project task or marketing endeavor or design,
Right,
issue.
right.
So.
Gotcha. Well, Clemente, I want to jump to you next, because this question is, what's the difference between firm partners and designers, essentially? And, we have you here with a bunch of sketches here behind you. Clearly, there's some ties to design in your work still. So you mind telling us a little bit about your role as a firm partner with design and what you do in day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, relating right to Mr. Shiver, and that, one thing that caught my attention as he was talking about his experience was that he always saw himself as a, small firm owner and trying to kind of instill a lot of that culture into this, corporate realm. I feel that in my experience, has been the opposite. I had always been in this corporate realm, big level infrastructure, traveling across the world, doing 3 million square foot developments just about everywhere. And now having the question of, how do I bring that down to a small scale at a small firm, right? And really thinking about, how do I go for that ambition of those big significant projects with a small, call it infrastructure, but very tactile infrastructure that we're trying to create. And so, for the longest, I would say that if I relate back to the topic of what we're here is the, architecture and business. And I separate those two because for the most part, in the beginning of our career, we focus so much on doing architecture, right? Because we don't learn so much about the business aspects of how an architecture firm works. It's very intricate. And some of us do get that experience. I personally did not. I did have that ambition of beginning a firm, but had no clue how to go about it. I just thought I would create an awesome museum like Stephen Hall, and then I would be instantaneously successful as a business owner. Not the case. But I think that I did get the opportunity to become a good architect, a good designer. And that formulated the framework by which I would create my firm. Something that had a purpose, that, that had a story. And I believe that in itself became a crucial aspect of how we're getting clients, right? This notion of how we communicate and gain relationships and ultimately get the opportunity to work with them, to create something that is meaningful. Now, meaningful does not mean amazing. It just means that it's meaningful to people, that it matters, right? So sometimes some projects are very stellar, portfolio worthy. Some other ones are meaningful in that they mean a lot to a, business owner who has done their first building. That's meaningful as well. And to your question about roles, I think that for the longest I did work in a bigger scale type of firm. And we always had, some benefits having a big infrastructure, but inherently that created what we call a pyramid effect, where you had, very segmented levels of what you would call that roles and responsibilities, with most of the young staff and younger designers at the bottom, and project managers closer to the top, principals and so on. I think for the longest, the goal was, much like Mr. Shiver was explaining, is to flatten the pyramid such that, you know, you create more of a horizontal studio. I think there you're able to collaborate, you know, a bit better. You're able to exchange ideas and learn a little bit more organically, as opposed to a, you know, telephone core type of situation. That's what we're trying to create today. And so here, you know, each one of us has a role per, you know, per firm mandates, right? Each one has a responsibility and therefore accountability. But I like, you know, I like to think that we're all working on a, you know, we all have our roles, but we're working together to achieve a common goal, which is the success of the project and obviously fulfill the requirements of our owner. So in that context, anybody can fill any one role, and it does not depend so much on your title. And I think sometimes people get that confused. I think that even as a young designer, my role within a project was a leader, to lead our teams and our endeavors. And that was not defined by the fact that I was a junior architect or an architect in training. There were, you know, senior vice presidents who, you know, ran my copies sometimes, right? And sometimes I did the other way around. So I think you'll find that there are environments, much like Mr. Shiver was explaining, that they're collaborative, and it really is up to your aptitude and potential to contribute in that context. And it is not defined by your title.
Right. Thanks for that perspective.
Clemente,
Go ahead,
I'd like to throw something there. I think he made a really important point, you know, that I want to come back to. I think at the end of the day, you know, your personal growth and development really leads to satisfaction in what we do. And to achieve that level of satisfaction, you know, on a daily basis, yearly basis, or over, you know, the bandwidth of your career, it's what he just said. It's about doing meaningful work, right? And so that comes down to really nurturing clients, nurturing projects, and nurturing staff so that the best can come together, right? And so as he kind of talked about, you know, a pyramid versus, you know, pancake structure, I think that the pancake structure, you know, kind of like what we try to create, is it feels right to me because it allows for that moment of collaboration, like he explained. When we get together for design charrettes, because we're a principal-led practice, the principal owns the design. Now, there's designers doing the work, right, the design piece, but ultimately the principal owns that project, that client, and is ultimately responsible for delivering the project at the highest level. But when we have design charrettes, you know, our whole office is structured in neighborhoods. But that neighborhood, you know, I sit next to an electrical engineer, I sit next to, you know, a senior project manager, a mechanical engineer, a structural engineer, a technology, you know, consultant, a civil engineer. So we're not like isolated by department. Like I have other disciplines that sit around me. So we're learning from each other, you know, within that construct of a neighborhood. But when we go to and have a charrette within our office, everyone is involved in that. Everyone in the office is invited to engage in that discussion with the team. And if we're having a design discussion at the schematic design level about, you know, canopies, you know, voids versus, you know, positive space or detail, if that electrical engineer, you know, or electrical intern has an idea about how we can elevate that design and make it better, even if it's an architectural solution, they have a voice in the discussion. And so I think that comes back to what Clemente said. Really, it's the moment of collaboration where we develop that synergy and meaningful work where our best comes out. And I think he really nailed, you know, that one point. And I think I just wanted to make it resonate with everyone because for me, that's what it's about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Messersmith, you want to join in on this conversation?
Oh, I love this part of the conversation because I think you're seeing a representation of how diverse the profession is and how different offices organize themselves in a different fashion. But it always shows too that we have a profession that really cherishes level organizations and teamwork and the concept of of neighborhoods and studios. Even in a mega firm like John's, it's comprised of small teams working on individual projects. And you love the resources that Stantec has available to them, but at the technical problem solving level, it's a team of people working together. And I love that concept. We had a term that we used off and on in my career called seller doer. And at the firms I was with, the ones that were properly organized, let's say, the senior partners, the principals participated in the day-to-day operation of the firm. They were not just sellers, they were doers in addition to that. And we called them seller doers. And the best firms, I think, operate that way. But let's be honest, at the senior level, you spend more time planning, directing, and controlling things than you do at the technical level, where you spend your day solving problems and getting the work done. To me, maybe the most important and challenging position in a firm is in the middle. Project manager, the project architect, the project designer, who not only has to spend time solving technical problems with the staff whose primary role is to do that, they have to support those partners, those principals who are out managing, directing, controlling things, making decisions for the firm. And for a firm to function in a highly efficient way, I think the project manager, project architect, project designer are the key, because they're the ones that answer up and they answer down in the organization.
Right.
Even if it's flat, somebody has to make sure that the technical staff is getting what they need and support they need. And they also have to make sure that the senior management is supported in a way that takes the firm to new projects, new clients, new levels.
Right, thanks for that. And I think before I segue to this next question, which I think the conversation's going this way already, Gwendolyn, I see you typed a question in the chat. That reminds me, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. If anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the Q&A portion at the end of today's discussion. But going back to the next question, which I'm going to try and tie in a couple of things that I think speak to what we were just talking about here. The main part of the question is, how significant is networking to an aspiring firm owner? And what influences does networking have, or how does networking contribute to in the way that you could seek out potential projects? And also, how does that contribute to how you build your team as your firm continues to grow? All within the realm of networking. And Professor Messersmith, since you've been heavily involved in organizations like AIA and TXA, perhaps I'll start with you. And you're muted, Professor Messersmith.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Thank you. No worries.
To me, networking is indispensable. At some level, everybody in the firm or in an organization needs to be networking. It's just a matter of who and what your network is. You may be networking with potential clients at one level, or you may be networking with your own staff at the other, but you're also responsible for maintaining your professional capabilities. So you might need to network with continuing education sources. but in addition to networking, to me, there are a couple of other there are a couple of other related functions. One of them is mentoring, which is another kind of networking.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's extremely important, I think, always has been, but still as much today as ever, to find mentors, but also to be one. And that's the challenge that all of us face, and really the responsibility that all of us have in this profession. Someday, everyone on this call is going to be a mentor if they're not already. And so you should always be attuned to building networks and assisting, helping your colleagues, whether they're older or younger. I don't discount the possibility that mentees can teach their mentors a thing or two every once in a while. So I just think it's important to maintain that collegiality and those personal connections, in addition to all the business and professional ones that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Clemente, can I hear from you next?
Yeah, definitely. I think that in all that we do, we often try to define these elements in very technical terms. So if I'm being quite genuine about what networking means to me, it's having the opportunity to get to know people, right? And in doing so, having a genuine interest in getting to know them. And in doing so, learning about their story, about who they are and how they got to that place. It's non-self-serving. It's truly just investing in that person and creating that relationship. Because people love working with friends, with people they know, right? And you can only do that if you establish sorry, they're expanding my office a little bit, so a little bit of work on the back.
Oh, gotcha. No worries. No worries.
But in doing that is getting to know their story, getting to know people, and eventually you learn to tell your own story, right? Who are you? Where did you came from? And why that's important to your career. I think that eventually over time, you learn then what's important to you. What is your story and what have you got to tell the world, your friend, your mother, I guess, right? And you slowly start to make a brand for yourself. And this brand is something that becomes sellable, something that becomes a part of who you are, something that drives your process, your design aesthetics. And next thing you know, this brand is actually an element that gets you hired, right? Yes, Professor Masterman is a nice guy, but he has a brand and I want to work with him because he's amazing in what he does, and that matters to me. I think ultimately, it all ties in together. And again, we don't begin networking so that we get to this point, but we began networking because we are truly genuinely interested in people and their stories, and we want to be part of that story. And together, I hope that we can, create successful relationships.
Yeah, thanks for that, Clemente. And I appreciate both of these these moments where we're honing in on the conversation, mentorship and building your brand, both very integral and quite adjacent to this idea of networking because they all tie in together. John, can we hear from you next?
Yeah, but I'm glad Professor Messer. I think that's key. It's a form of networking, and I think one of the things that we've really been missing in our profession over the last year is the opportunity to engage with the younger staff, one-on-one, face-to-face, and collaborate because of this COVID thing. So, that's one aspect of it. But I guess the thing that I would want everyone to take away is networking is key. That's probably the most critical thing about architecture and for you professionally, because it's about relationship building, right? And so everything we do in this profession is about relationship building. I tell people on my marketing business development team that really marketing and business development is everything that occurs outside the four walls of the box that we work in. And you say, why? And it's because there's a potential client out there that can see and perceive what we could do, right? And so, my takeaway would be, today everyone on this call is networking, right? We have students at UNT that are UTA that are networking in this conversation, engaging with us in this dialogue. I'm networking right now with two professional peers, right? It may be, a conversation point, if we're at TXA, next summer, next year, or at some point, or if we run into each other at an AIA event, we can come back to this conversation and say, hey, I really appreciated your comment on that topic. So I think the critical thing is always look for opportunities to engage with people and network, whether that's within a professional organization or within a civic group, an advocacy group, amongst, peers in the office, find some senior staff that you can align with because you have some similar interests and learn from them. But I think ultimately, a lot of people are wired differently, right? There's extroverts and introverts. And, admittedly, I was an introvert coming out of high school. I was not wired to go, meet people and introduce myself and kind of be, outgoing in that fashion. But I learned very quickly that in the profession, I needed a roof over my head. I like to eat, right? And that I had to go, make relationships and cold call, potential clients and build and cultivate relationships with them, so that when they had opportunities, that opportunity came to me, right? And so look at everything out there on the vast landscape and say, what are the opportunities for me to plug in, to engage, to do things, whether that's at the city level, at your church, civic organization, advocacy groups. It's limitless. But, get involved in stuff and get to know people, because you'll find throughout your career that those little touch points and those relationships that you build along the way will leverage another relationship or a potential client opportunity or a potential project opportunity. And so, that begins today. Before you graduate, start looking and building that network, that database of contacts of people that you know. I mean, they say it all the time. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, there's truth to that. And so I can't tell you even today how many times a week, a month, a year, I'll come up against something that I really don't have the answer for, but I do know somebody that has that subject matter expertise that I can bring into this conversation and help guide it, right? And that really only occurs through networking. So that really starts today. It doesn't start at some point in the future. It starts today. And, as you meet people, affirm, their value and worth to you. One of the things that I do is I write personal hand notes. It's really easy to send an email, right? As a thank you, or a text as a thank you. But when I really engage in a conversation that really is a client or networking opportunity, I take the time to write 3 sentences on a note card and sign it, "Thank you, John." And I try to illustrate a couple of points from that conversation that were important to me, that I learned from, that I got a value for. And I state that in the card so that I affirm to them, I heard you, right? I heard you. And so I think you can look at not only the networking opportunities, but ways to leverage and strengthen those relationships once they begin to get established. And don't wait till later, start today.
Professor Messersmith, did you have something else?
I like that. And I just want to add a little bit of information. There's a really good book about networking. The title of it is Never Eat Alone. And it's written by a man named Keith Ferrazzi. I had to look that up. I didn't remember it, but I read it a number of years ago. And the central, or one of the key points that he makes in his book is that networking doesn't start when you ask someone for a favor. It starts when you give someone something of value, when you ask, or when you say, let me do that for you, or I have something to offer you. So when you're building a network, don't think of it as acquiring contacts or acquiring people who owe you favors. Think of giving favors and providing value to other people to start relationships. And I love John's admonition that it's all about relationships, because it is. This business is nothing but relationships.
It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point that we heard last, I think resonated with me, and I hope it resonates with everyone here, is that it isn't something that you have to wait until after graduation before you could start reaching out and building your network. It is super important to remember that it's something that you are doing now, as John was mentioning, that being a part of events like this is one way to network, but certainly there's many other ways that you can be building your network now. So don't forget that. I want to be mindful of our time. I see we have a couple questions in the chat. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to combine this next question and let it be a two-parter. So the two parts of this question are, what is one crucial part of practice that you weren't taught in architecture school? And what topics outside of architecture would you suggest students look into as they transition into the professional realm? And if I may, Professor Messersmith, since you gave us the last book of things outside of architecture, perhaps I'll start back with you again.
Well, this will sound familiar to those of you who might be in my class, but the thing that I wished for more than anything from architecture school, it's a long, long time ago, and I don't know if it's still a drawback or not, but I wished for more knowledge and practice in communication, both oral and written. We did our jury presentations and we wrote some papers, but I don't think we ever studied it as a in a disciplined way, put it that way. I don't think we ever studied it in a disciplined way. And so that's one of the things, or a couple of things, that I try to cover in my class, because I don't think, in general, architects are visual people. We rely on images and graphics and things like that to communicate. But many people in the rest of the world rely on words and either written or spoken. So they give our profession more power when we are good oral and written communicators. As far as topics outside of the design profession, I encourage everybody to read outside your discipline. It's easy to grab the latest architectural journal and read about what's going on, and I think it's important to do that, but it's also important to read books and journals outside the profession. And by the way, to the extent you can read your clients or your potential clients' journals, that might position you to better acquire their projects in the future. If you're needing to, or if you're wanting to expand into the healthcare market, then you better be reading healthcare journals and understanding what hospital administrators and the medical profession is doing. So don't limit your exposure to just those things inside the profession.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even though in that last example where you're suggesting looking at other professions, say like the medical field, that's something definitely that builds your knowledge to help make you a more marketable professional, that you'll have knowledge in these other areas also. So I think that was a great point. John, can we hear from you next?
Sure. I'll break it into two categories. I think it's hard skills versus soft skills. So on the hard skills side, I'd say coming out of college, I did my undergraduate and graduate work at A&M. I had a bit exposure to the business because I started in business school. There was no business discussion at all in the School of Architecture. So I think that, to some degree, I and most others were ill prepared for, the business environment. And what does that really mean? Marketing and business development is something that was never even mentioned while I was at A&M. So I think that, really to prepare, our profession and those students, to go and procure work, there should have been some opportunity to engage in that discussion, and it just didn't happen. So on the soft skills side, I'm glad Professor Messersmith, spoke about communication. That's key. That's key. I think that it is both, that the people that find a quick path in our profession are those that can engage in conversations verbally, and be very eloquent and articulate in what they say. And when you look at what they do, they've described that, and it's meaningful. Likewise, they can write, and what they write about, a project description or a process in an RFQ, it conveys a sense of storytelling and tells an accurate story. I think to add on to that would be listening skills. I know a lot of architects, because some of us are driven by ego, that go in and tell a client what they're going to get, what they're going to do, or how to solve their problem. I walk in, at an interview level and grab both earlobes, almost in every interview and say, here are the best two tools that I have, right? And this process with you begins by listening. I don't have anything to offer. I'm simply going to help identify the architectural problem and guide in a collaborative fashion this process and our discussion towards some solution. And so I think listening skills, are a component of that communication piece that he spoke to that are just as critical. So those are kind of the hard skill deficiencies that I had coming out of schools, and the soft skills opportunities, I would say, and suggest that people focus on, because, that's really the tool set you need in this profession. Because if you come out of school with a degree, right, you're coachable, right? So you should have a technical knowledge that you have the hard skills, can be trained to do the task, right? But if somebody doesn't have the soft skills, like they can't collaborate, they can't work with other people, they don't have any communication skills, they're not a good listener, that's a much greater obstacle professionally and personally, quite honestly, to overcome. And so focus on the soft skills. I think those are more important than the hard technical skills.
Gotcha. Great point there, John. Clemente, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I won't add too much to it because it's just splendid the way that it was discussed. But I will say that I think that writing itself is so important. I don't think that in architecture school we spent enough time or learned enough about what writing really meant. And I think you have to be articulate in writing as much as you are articulate in your, call it your design prowess, right? To say that, there's many ways I can design this box. There's many ways I can draw this curtain wall. Well, how many ways can you describe that specific thing you're trying to do and write it down? And I think in that writing, as has been explained, is be inspirational, because on the other side, people are looking for that story. And I think it ties back to even networking, learning how to tell stories, learning how to translate those stories into tangible solutions. And when you're able to capture the essence and listen to those needs and those requirements of your client, I think a client success story becomes, a big part of who you are as a design firm, as a business in general. And I think that's genuine and that's exciting at the same time. On the topic of, on the outside, and I'm trying to just kind of think about what things are most relevant to students as they're graduating.
Sure.
And to me, probably the biggest thing that, obviously you're in the position where, okay, where do I go from here, right? What kind of firm do I go into? And I think that you really have to align yourself with the people that believe in you, that are going to invest in you, are going to help you grow. And I think that you can find people in any one environment. So it's not about a big firm, a medium firm, or a small firm. It's about the people themselves. Because everywhere that I've always been in a small team. I'm in a small team now. I was at a small team RTKL. I was at a small team in another firm. So I think align yourself with people that will invest in you and will allow you to grow with select opportunities. And ultimately, rely on your network. Don't be shy to extend yourself out there and learn from others. I think it takes a tremendous amount of humility, right? To say, I don't know, or to even look to your peers and say, hey, what do you think? How should I go about this? And truly listen to them, not just, give them the opportunity to talk, really listen to them. And I think that you will learn quite a bit, and eventually that skill will translate to listening to your clients and doing the same as well. So very excited for you guys to graduate, and not a great time to graduate right at this point, but I think that those soft skills that Mr. Shiver just talked about are going to be instrumental, foundational to having that kind of growth and those opportunities that I think you all are looking for.
Great, Clemente. Thank you. And I think that's a great way to conclude this portion of the conversation as we now transition to the Q&A part. The first question comes in from Gwendolyn, and I'm going to go back to a gallery view so we can all see each other here. Gwendolyn, are you still here, and are you able to ask your question?
Yes, I'm still here. I was just asking the question in terms of disciplines while you're in school, like real estate development, planning, financing. What other courses would you agree that architecture students should take, since you guys are in a collaborative type environment?
If anyone has any thoughts on them, I'll let this be kind of more of an open dialogue. So anyone who has thoughts, please jump in.
I would say if you do have time, besides being in architecture school, which is very demanding, take the time to travel, right? Travel often, travel as much as you can. And I think that's going to be, such a good experience that's going to help you grow, and I think that goes more towards the soft skills rather than the hard skills, which again, I would try to grow as much as possible, especially at the beginning of your career.
Traveling abroad I'm just asking.
I would say, if, for example, if you haven't been to the Grand Canyon, if you haven't seen a beautiful forest, if you haven't explored a cave or even a waterfall close to you, those little moments, of reflection, of understanding, then become experiences that will allow you to relate to people as you grow in the profession.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah.
John, did you have something?
Yeah, when she asked the question about travel, I think that's incredible. If you can go travel internationally, great. I didn't have that opportunity. Like Clemente said, just find places you can go, whether they're on the other side of Fort Worth or Big Bend or the Grand Canyon. Find places where you can go see things of beauty, have a moment to appreciate why, right, and build that experience. Because all of those are memories that'll come back in certain moments that you can use to serve in a context of solving things or creating something of beauty. And as far as the courses themselves, I took sociology, geology, anything outside of your college. Go take something in another college, just so you have a broader understanding, of what else is out there. Certainly the real estate stuff and all that, within the College of Architecture and Urban Planning, but if you can even get in other colleges, to understand different disciplines. You never know. If you take a nursing course, you might end up doing healthcare facilities someday, and that's a talking point in a conversation. So just be kind of have a Renaissance view, I guess would be my answer.
Yeah, I think I like that point, John. And Professor Messersmith, you spoke or alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation about, just finding anything outside of architecture that interests you to just really delve into it. Because if you think about the role of the architects, we're, almost all the time we're designing spaces for other people in other professions. So if you already have, a sort of niche or a sector of architecture that you're interested in, absolutely I would encourage, taking perhaps courses in those particular areas, just because that's going to make you a more well-rounded architect and make you more knowledgeable in that particular field. So I think that was a great question. Did you have something to add, Mr. Smith?
Yes, and I really like the question for stimulating a student's thinking about what motivates them, what interests them. It's not so much that you take some course or investigate some discipline outside of your chosen path. It's that you find something that captures your interest and you go for it. Maybe it's psychology, maybe it's nursing, maybe it's math, maybe it's some other form of science or art. The key to getting benefit from it is to have a genuine interest in it. So the answer can't be the same for everybody, but find something that stimulates you a little bit and go explore it, and it will broaden your horizons.
Yeah, if I could add one more thought there. Thank you, Professor Messersmith. From my own experience, the class that I felt outside of architecture that impacted me the most actually was a class I took my freshman year. It was what was the name of the course? It was one of your first English courses or literature, or actually not literature. It was a writing course. It was an honors rhetoric course. And, you would think, oh, writing, that's pretty different than architecture. But as Clemente was kind of alluding to, writing is, really significant in our profession, whether that's writing your own business mission or vision statement, whether you're writing a proposal. Writing is a pretty integral part in what we do, and forming your argument, understanding who the audience is and how they'll receive what it is that you're trying to convey. So certainly, if writing's your thing, or if you want to work on your communication skills, courses like that are also very absolutely beneficial. I even ran into my old writing professor years later, and I told him, I'm in architecture, but I have to say your class was one of the most impactful ones that I've ever had, and he really appreciated that. And so I think that was a great question, Wendy. Thanks for asking. The next one that we have is from Marone. Marone, are you still on the line? Are you able to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, so my question, we were talking about the business, being a business owner as an optimistic thing, and not to kind of burden everyone about the hardships of owning a business, but I wanted to ask some tougher questions. And so, what are some things that you had to struggle with either becoming a business owner or being a business owner, right? What are the day-to-day struggles, and what would you say are sacrifices you make on a daily basis in order to run your business efficiently?
Can anyone jump in if you have something on your mind?
Man, that's a great question. There's the glamour and then there's the dark side, right? So when I started my business and I walked away from the partnership, I left with nothing but, a coffee box with my, photos of my kids and wife in it, right? And so I spent 9 months getting in my car and driving out every day to go see every client that would open the door and let me fill the coffee cup up and sit down and talk to them. For almost a year, trying to just cultivate and build relationships. That's hard when you're not getting paid, right? It's hard when you have rent, for your space, that you got to find money for, so you're looking at a great capital investment to go into business for yourself if you you don't initially have a client that you're going to start with, and that doesn't mean taking a client from a firm. I'm not suggesting that you do that because there's penalties for that too. But you know, it takes time. It takes effort. You know, you have to have a sense of energy about you that will keep driving you on all those days that you know you're not met with success, right? You know, I found that you know the insurance, you know, professional liability insurance was this massive policy I had to have, you know, just to have a shingle, you know, on the door. When I hired my first employee, I now had an HR department, you know, that I was never prepared to, you know, deal with people. So there's all those aspects of businesses, of being in business, you know, that represent business risk that I solely own. You know, I was the last guy paid. You know, everybody else got paid before I got paid because, you know, if I you know, didn't have the accounts receivable that month, you know, I had to carry it until next month, you know, but ensure that all the employees and bills were paid. So, you know, those early years, you know, I'd say for the first 5 years, the first year it was like a horror show. You know, I had anxiety from it. By the time I got to year 2 to year 3, I had, you know, great clients at work, and I kept thinking, man, at least they're not going to eat me, right? You know, I'm going to survive. And then by the time I got to year 5, I had developed such a risk tolerance that I didn't even think about that stuff anymore. But you know, it's real and scary. You know, that first year when I, you know, literally walked away and, you know, opened the lights on a new shop, and you know, didn't have that big huge project to carry with me. I had to go find it. And so I think that's the difficulty of going and starting your own firm. That Clemente probably would confirm as well, and David, you know, in that it's easier to walk into a firm and become an owner in an existing firm because that entity has a presence, it has goodwill already built, it has a portfolio that already stands behind it. Because when I left that firm, people were like, man, John, that's great. You know, you've got 10 years of experience, but you know, what experience does your firm have? It's only been around a week, a month, a year, 3 years, right? Those are different conversations. It didn't matter how huge a projects I'd done before. It's what had I done as this entity, and it's a different conversation.
Yeah, Clemente, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that you all have in a group projects, right? Team efforts, and there's always a slacker or two, and you say, you know, it's fine, we can live with that, or you overcome it by working a little extra harder. Having a firm is kind of like being on a team project all the time. And there's always at least one.
Oh man, don't say that, Clemente. I had a couple bad group experiences this semester.
Yeah, and so, but you know, but the reality though, I say is that, you know, we have no room to fail to some extent because, you know, doing a project is not a grade. You either pass or you fail. And that failure can be catastrophic, right? We miss one door swing and maybe it's not, you know, life safety compliant. All of a sudden we're $20, $30, you know, in the hole. And our fee was only $15,000, let's say. So the amount of liability, much like, you know, was just explained, is tremendous. So you have the opportunity to gain a finite amount of money on any project you do, but an indefinite amount of money that you can lose in so many ways. So the pressure is always there to perform, but still have the balance of saying, hey, we want to grow. We want to make sure that we're, you know, we're all working as a team, right? Much like in a group project, but with the pressure as an owner, as a leader, that your project has to perform financially. So, you know, everything that somebody's doing is somebody's taking a little longer to do the job because, you know, maybe they do need a little longer, or maybe they just don't get it. You realize that that's going to affect the bottom line, and eventually the firm has to survive. Now, I think the toughest thing that you'll do as a firm owner is saying, realizing what your potential is, realizing what you can and cannot do. I think that it would be pretty amazing if you were out on your own and say, hey, I could get any project I want, I can do whatever that comes in front of me. But the reality is you may not have the expertise, you may not have the capacity. So matter of fact, you may not even have a portfolio to be considered for some of these things. So just because you hang a shingle and you have an architecture firm doesn't mean that you're automatically qualified to do architecture. You have to build the trust, you have to build your network, and you have to build your portfolio. So for us, You know, we got at the very beginning of our firm, we went on our own personal portfolio. Hey, this is me, this is my experience, what I've done. But we have already run into situations where they said, well, how much experience does Modus Architecture have? How long have you guys been working together? Right? So they want to see that track record. Now, once we hit 3 years, 5 years, and we have people working with us for a while, I think that we're going to start getting access to those kind of competitions and those kind of opportunities. And so it's also a game of patience where, at what level you're going to be able to grow exponentially in terms of, the team members, but also the projects that you pursue. It's very gratifying to have your own firm. And it's exciting to think that, you all working to get together towards a common vision. And I think that if you stay genuine to why you do architecture, you will show up to your job, whether as a firm owner or as a leader, and saying, how can I contribute? And how can I make my contributions that much more meaningful? And I think ultimately, the success of the practice hinges on every single individual from the highest to the lowest, marching in the same cadence and rhythm, right? And so that applies to a big firm and certainly to a small firm. And so as a leader, as a firm owner, you have to establish that cadence, and you have to motivate and inspire people to follow you and to grow in that manner as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that comment too. Professor
Yeah.
Messersmith, did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I love those answers from both my colleagues, and I'm tempted to tell you horror stories of the times we lost a job, and we thought we had it all lined up, and we went to interview and knocked the interview out of the park and still didn't get hired. I'm tempted to tell you about the times, not too many, when I fired myself from a project because either I had a philosophical difference with the client, or there was just something about the relationship that I didn't want to extend or pursue. But I think all of us as firm owners eventually come to a realization that's even bigger than any of that stuff. And it is that we are business owners who have employees, and those employees rely on us for a living. And when it dawned on me that I didn't just have a staff of architects and interns, I had a staff who had families at home. And it's my responsibility as a leader in the firm to be sure that the firm is successful so they can remain employed. And the hardest thing I ever did was terminate an employee, not for cause, but because we didn't have the work. And I think that's what brings us back to reality. And the question originally was, what's the hardest struggle? I struggled with that as much as anything, because I've slowly came to the realization that if the firm didn't succeed, then families suffered. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just client. It was families. It was real people. And that's what I love about the profession, where we are in some ways a family, a professional family, as well as having families of our own at home.
And I'm going to add just real quick to that. I think
Yeah, go for it.
you have to grow accustomed to, feeling uncomfortable in so many situations because you have that burden of responsibility. And man, having tough conversations with your teammates is definitely one of the hardest things that you'll do, to tell somebody, you know what, you're simply just not performing, and here are the reasons why. To be analytical about their performance when they thought they were doing just fine. So as a firm owner, you have this expectation as to what each role and each person needs to do. And if they're not doing that role, even if they're trying, even if they're putting so many hours, it is your role and responsibility to the firm to address that performance issue. You may not want to, but it is your responsibility. And so you do it in such a way that is compassionate, but also as specific and as constructive as possible, because that person deserves as much honesty. And this is where communication and your ability to communicate is going to either make you very successful in that, call it a confrontation, or you may come out pulling each other's hair, I guess. So, a fine line or not.
It sounds like you've been talking to a friend of mine named Pete Delisle. Do you know Pete?
Oh, definitely. Very, what full of knowledge and every piece of wisdom that humanity has to offer.
One of the key things I remember about him when he talks about management is the question to ask an underperformer is not, can you do a better job, but what do you need that you don't have to do this job? Here's what I expect from you. Now, what do you need to get it done? And so often management has this tendency to just say, you've just got to improve. You got to get better. But the deeper question is, what can I do to make you successful? That's what a firm leader really needs to focus on. What do people need to succeed in their jobs?
Yeah, Professor Smith, I think that's a great way to conclude today's discussion. Whereas some of the questions early on, they were about how do we get, how do we get started? What are the things that what are some best practices we can adopt now to help establish us as we make the inevitable transition to firm ownership? I like the way that the conversation has transitioned now to, once you've made it to that point, what are some ways that help you to remain successful? The importance of having your team, the importance of mentorship, networking, and being critical not only of yourself but also of your team, and being able to communicate that effectively and compassionately. All very important ideas. So I want to thank you all for contributing to this conversation. And I guess to conclude today's panel discussion, I just wanted to again reiterate our appreciation, both as a UTA student, but also from our AIAS chapter, for all of our guests for joining us here this evening. I'm glad we were able to get the three of you on, because I felt like you each brought a unique perspective. You all had different trajectories with your career and how you arrived as firm owners. So I think the three of you brought on a great conversation. So thank you on behalf of all of our students here. We really appreciated your time and the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you,
problem.
guys.
And John.
Well, with
Good seeing you guys. Good seeing you.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think that's a good point to conclude today's discussion. So thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you around. Next week, we actually have another panel discussion. It's on alternative career paths in architecture. So we have another great panel of guests for those of you who are interested. We have different areas of architecture that you can pursue outside of a traditional office. So I hope you'll join us for that. But with that, I'll leave everyone off to their evenings. Y'all have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.